successfully. And I'm sure you guys would agree that she's much better looking than I am. So, and then we've gone through a fashion show where the fashions run from the 1860s to the 1920s. So I thought I would just make a few comments and kind of get you in the idea of the subject of the war between the states. And then we would just kind of let it go as to where the conversation flowed, okay? I'm sitting here around a fire, and this would be something that these other reenactors that are around here, this would be something they tell you that this is typical. It's something that would have happened back in the days that we portray. In the evening when, especially if you had some time, if you weren't on the march, you'd gather around, you'd set up your tents, small tents, maybe 8 tents. In my case, I would have a staff who would come in, and what they would do is they would set up I'd have a large wall tent. In fact, there'd be a couple of them. One would be my sleeping quarters, and the other one would be what I would use for an office. And then there would always be a fire sitting outside, a few tables scattered around, and general officers would be riding in and out constantly. I should add that in addition to that, in the direct proximity of where I am, there would be some 200 men that would be camped, and at least half of them would have their horses already saddled up and ready to go in case something came up in a hurry where they needed to protect me. But there was always at least a company of 200 men that were with me, and then my staff, my immediate aide-de-camp, I would have anywhere from 3 to 4 or 5, maybe as many as 6 officers with me that we would call cadre or aide-de-camps. They would serve as a communications officer. If I had messages to get out, I would have one person who would actually write the message, and that message would go on to somebody else, and that person would make certain that a courier got it and it was dispatched in a timely fashion. Then there's another person that would be my numbers man. This would, in my case, it would have been a young captain who came into Western Virginia with me in the fall of 1861 by the name of Walter Taylor. When Walter Taylor and I came in, and another guy that was with us, whose last name was Washington, who was the nephew of George Washington, and the 3 of us came in. We had a pretty small group that I traveled with at that time. In fact, I was criticized for not having more men. Well, the more people you've got around you, the harder it is to maneuver, especially when you get into the mountain areas like this. But at night we'd sit around, there would be fires like this, and we would plan strategy. We'd gather the information that's coming in from the different, there would be a constant flow of couriers coming in, and they would provide information as to where the different general officers were, what their command consisted of, how many people they had, how many were available for duty, how many were not, and this type of thing, so, because I constantly needed that type of information. For example, in this region here, there may have been a command in the area of 6 to 7, possibly upwards to 8,000 men. But not all the men, in the fall of 1861, not all the men were available for duty because sickness prevailed, and as many as 50% of the men that were here were unavailable for duty, for sickness or whatever the case may be. Pneumonia, malaria, not necessarily malaria, but different diseases. Dysentery was a big disease in the camps at the time. And all this information would be coming in to me, and I would be assembling this information, trying to put it together and make some kind of heads or tails of it, and so that we could begin to plan some type of action for the next day. Now, is this any different than what we do today as reenactors? No, not really. When we go to reenactments, the same thing happens. When the day is spent and we're gathered around the campfire, this is basically where everybody conjures. We just gather around this thing, and we'll tell. And interestingly enough, we'll tell war stories. We'll tell about events that happened on the battlefield that day. We'll talk about activities that happened 150 years ago that are parallel to things that are happening today. And it's interesting. I'm just going to kind of bounce around with a lot of this stuff so you can kind of get an idea as to what it was. A few years ago, I was down in Tampa, Florida, helping to dedicate the largest Confederate battle flag at the highest elevation. The tallest flagpole you can have that you can fly a flag from is 140 feet. Well, the folks, the SCV camp in Tampa, Florida, decided that they were going to have a battle flag flying at 139 feet. And so we went down and we helped to battle, we helped to dedicate that. There was a guy who portrays Jubal Early was with me, a guy who portrays General Richard Ewell, a guy who portrays E. Porter Alexander, Jeb Stewart, and myself, and we were down. And this was probably in either 09 or 10, right in through there. And after the ceremony had taken place and a few other things, we went back to this place that that was available to me because I'm from Tampa. And it's a place available to me, and so we were all kind of sharing the quarters there. And we were sitting around dressed like this, and we were talking about the times. And if you remember back just in the spring of 2010, there was all sorts of activity taking place in the halls of Congress, and as a result there were several states that were talking about secession. And you know, this is just 3 or 4 years ago, or 3 years ago that we're talking about. And we kind of looked at each other and we thought to ourselves, will we not ever learn? You know, here we are portraying people that lived 150 years ago, and they were seceding, and at this particular time we had 26 states that were now suing the central government, and some were talking about secession. And it was just kind of ironic how this all just kind of came about. And the same thing happens with reenactments when we go to, there's always a campfire or 2 or 3 campfires going on, and you know, in close proximity. And the soldiers will sit around, and we may pop some popcorn, we may make some s'mores, but we're all dressed like this. And sometimes you'll even find a campfire where they may bring out a bottle of Jack Daniels or something, and it'll make its way around the ring like this. But I can tell you that that's not a regular thing, because most of the people, most of the reenactors take it pretty serious. And if they do, you know, if there is one bottle of Jack Daniels, by the time it gets around a crowd like this, it's gone and nobody's loaded. But it's really an interesting hobby. We do it because we enjoy it. We do it because we have the opportunity to meet and talk with a lot of folks like you. Had a lady come up to me here last year. I don't know if she's here now. She came up to me just earlier tonight, and she said, General, when you were here last year, you talked about going down to Savannah, Georgia, and talking to the United States Military Special Operations Command. Did you do that? And I said, yeah, and I don't know, I'll share that with you what happened. In the fall of last year, I was contacted by a man named Admiral William McCraven, who's the commander of the United States United States Special Operations Command. And he said, we'd like to ask you to be a speaker at a conference we're having in Savannah, Georgia in December. And we've got a lot of dignitaries coming in from foreign countries, and we'd like for you to talk with them about our post-war activities. And I, you know, being the person I am, I said, well, now, are you looking for somebody who's politically correct? Because if you are, I'll be happy to find you somebody else. But if you want somebody who's going to tell you the truth, I'll be happy to do so. And they said, no, we want you to come in and tell us the truth. So December the 4th or 5th, whatever it is, comes, and we go down to Savannah, Georgia. We walk into this conference, and what I soon am brought to the attention of, there's 66 different countries represented by 106 different ambassadors and vice presidents of these countries. Russia and Cambodia and the Balkans and Finland and Canada and New Zealand, and these people are all represented, they're all gathered together. Nobody's in uniform because everybody's treated the same way, okay? And I sit down, I spend 4 days sitting next to the Russian ambassador here, and who, by the way, gets really grilled by the Finland ambassador over the position that Russia didn't take in the Libya affair earlier that year, okay? And all of a sudden it dawns on me that I'm there with 106 people from 66 different countries, and some of these people are vice presidents of countries. And then there's about 35 to 40 U.S. generals and admirals that are there, and they want me to talk about our post-war experience, Reconstruction, and how bad it was, okay? Because the purpose was to let them know the mistakes that we made in our post-war period, which it's a study all by itself, folks, in case you've never done it. Our post-war activities is a study all by itself, because Lincoln dies, and now you get the radicals, and the radicals take over, and they do all sorts of crazy things. And ultimately, the effects of those crazy things last for 150 years. In fact, some of the activities are still going on now, some almost 155 years afterwards. And they wanted me to talk about this, and I did so, and had a great time, and met a lot of great people. But this is just one of the things that we as reenactors, some of the things
Yes,
that the people that we get to meet and the experiences we get, I have been blessed with having the appearance of General Robert E. Lee, and in that capacity have done a lot of things that a lot of guys don't, a lot of people don't do. I've been with the Lee family. On the 200th birthday of Robert E. Lee, I was with his family. We cut a birthday cake with the general's sword. I actually carried the general's sword, and we carried it down to this particular place where the birthday cake was, and the Lee family called me up and said, well, you know, we want you to help us cut the cake. So I was there with the Lee family cutting a cake with the general's sword.
Wow.
Earlier this year, my wife and I were invited to attend on the Mississippi River boat, or Mississippi River. They've got a new paddle wheel boat that just came back online in March of this year, and they asked us if we would spend 20 days on the Mississippi River floating up and down. Well, naturally I told them it was a hard assignment, but somebody had to do it. Okay? And so we spent 20 days starting in Vicksburg, traveled up the Mississippi to the Ohio, down the east on the Ohio a little ways, down through the Kentucky Lake, and then into the Tennessee River, on down through Alabama and up into Nashville, Tennessee, and stopped along the way at a lot of different Civil War sites. And while they weren't pertinent to me, they would be more in line with General Grant and some of the activities that he did. But these are some of the things that we get to experience as reenactors. But I think probably the thing that's the most enjoyable is when we can sit around with folks like you and chat with you. One time at Gettysburg, and I'll never forget this, about 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, all the activities at Gettysburg are over. And some of the people have broken down and they've gone home. And I'm sitting there with 4 or 5 other generals, and we're sitting there, a nice, beautiful campfire, just like this one. And we're sitting there and we're roasting some marshmallows, and I had taken some popcorn. By the way, there's a secret to making popcorn. Well, you get one of these old roasters that you shake. Some of you may not know that, but they got a little bucket like this, and you got a long handle, and you hold it over the fire and you shake it. Okay, I've got one of those, and you know, you can burn popcorn in a heartbeat. One of those things, and it doesn't taste good when it's burnt. But if you go to the microwave thing and you take one of them packages, you know, and you tear off the